In this part 3 of the wooden barrel series, we're going to export this and bring it into Substance Painter so we can texture it. Now, if you've been following this series and watched the other two parts, part 1 modeling and part 2 UVing, I made a slight adjustment, which was introducing this piece of geometry right here. Those little bolts that you see, little straps that keep the metal ring together and attached. So I introduced that piece of geometry. So instead of doing it through a normal map, which I thought I wanted to do, but I decided not to, I just simply created an 8-sided cylinder, beveled the corner just once, cleaned it up, UV'd, and then duplicated all the way down across. So let me show you what the new UV layout looks like. And again, that were very simple to do. And here's what the UVs for those little pieces look like. And I made sure I have enough space, so I made them not overlap or stack, but occupy their own UV space. So that's just a small adjustment that I did. But everything else is the same. So let's go ahead and export this so we can bring it into Substance Painter. I'm gonna make sure that my barrel is at the world origin. And let me go ahead and modify the pivot point. And I don't really need to do that because it's already at the world origin, but just so I keep it consistent. I'm gonna hold DX, just snap it to the bottom to the world origin. And then let's go ahead and export. I'm gonna go to File, Export Selection. And I'm gonna export this with following options. It's going to be FBX export. I'm gonna enable smoothing groups and smooth mesh. And then I'm just gonna find a folder where I want to export. So I already have a folder set up, and it's gonna be right here. It's inside my project directory. Project directory for the entire project, not my project directory. And I'm just gonna put it right here, export meshes. You can export this anywhere you want, just as long as you can find it. And then I'm gonna go ahead and name this wooden barrel. And all you need to do is export selection. And that is it. You now have your FBX that you can import and use in Substance Painter. In Substance Painter, let's go ahead and create a new project. Go to File, New. My template is going to be Unreal Engine 4. That's where I want my asset to be in. And this will set up all the other properties that I need, especially for normal map format, as well as this little check mark for compute engines. My document resolution, I want to work with 2K. And for File, you need to choose your FBX mesh. So I already navigated into that directory where I exported the FBX. So I'm going to go ahead and select it and click Open. Everything else will be untouched. Let's go ahead and click OK. Alright, here's our mesh. The first thing you need to do is to bake your maps. So this way, Substance knows how to texture your object based on its curvature and its position in world space. Switch over to Texture Set Settings and let's go ahead and bake. I'm going to scroll down into Mesh Maps and Bake Mesh Maps. Open this up. First thing I do is output size. I'm going to increase it to 2048. Under Mesh Maps, we do not need ID. And I'm just going to go ahead and disable it. There are a few other settings that are recommended. For ambient occlusion, you may want to pump up the secondary rays. So maybe bump this up to 128. As well as for curvature, under secondary rays, go up to 64. Maybe even up to 128. Just to make sure that those two maps have a bit more quality to them. And that's it. Everything else gets kept the same at default, and I'm going to go ahead and click on Bake Selected Textures. Give it a minute, let Painter calculate everything, and now our object is baked. We are now ready to begin texturing. I'm going to switch over back to layers. There's an empty layer that gets placed here. I don't need it. I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And I'm going to utilize smart materials. We're going to use 3 smart materials, one for the wood, for the entire barrel, one for the metal strips, for the rings, and another one for the cork. And then we're going to adjust different properties within those smart materials to make it different. So it's not the same smart material as everybody else uses. We're going to make it unique in our own, adjusting the settings. And then we're going to do another pass by adjusting a few things in addition to the smart materials. And add our own dirt, maybe some rust, and just make it unique to what the outcome, what the result that I want in my mind for this barrel to be. And doing this is a really good way to kind of learn Painter by utilizing what is given to you with smart materials, but then changing the properties within them and then adding things on top of them to make the outcome more unique to your asset. The first smart material I'm going to apply is the wood. So I'm going to switch over to smart materials, the second icon over here, and I'm going to search for wood. And when you're starting out, when you're not sure what's going to look good, you can just simply left click, hold, and drag any of these smart materials or regular materials for that matter, and just drop it either on top of your mesh just to see what they look like, or you can just drag it inside your layer stack. So you can just kind of see what the outcome is going to be. Now the one that I'm going to use is this wood beach veined. I like the look of this, but I'm going to heavily change this. I don't like the brightness of this, and I'm going to make a few adjustments to make it a little more darker, dirtier, and with addition of my own things on top. So I'm going to go ahead and take this other smart material I applied and let's delete it. Then next I'm going to also apply right away the steel rust, some kind of a rusty steel surface to the rings. So I'm going to go ahead and search for steel. And again, you can do exactly the same thing, just simply left click, hold, and drag right on top of your mesh. Take a look at what that's going to look like. It is going to override and place that material on top of everything else. But right now, you're just picking out the material that you'd want to use. And then we're going to mask out where that steel is going to appear. So I don't want to use that one. And I already know in my mind which one I want to use. And it's going to be steel rust surface. And it's this one right here. Now left click, hold, and drag. Top of your mesh or in the layer stack, and that's the one I like. So let's go ahead and mask this out. So we get to see the wood and then the steel. I'm going to come over to the steel rust surface. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to add a black mask. This essentially masks everything out. And then within the mask, I'm going to select the mask. I'm going to pick which parts do I want to have that steel to appear. For this, I'm going to use polygon fill option. On the left hand side, you're going to see this fourth icon down, polygon fill. I'm going to enable it. And then either in the top menu right here or on the bottom right, I'm going to choose one of these options. You have triangle fill, polygon fill, mesh fill, and UV chunk fill. Now, because our rings are actually part of the mesh, I cannot use mesh fill. That's the one I usually use if they are separate piece of geometry that I combined. And I will probably do this for the other pieces of geometry, like these bolts or maybe the cork. But in that case, for the rings, I'm going to use UV chunk fill. I'm going to go ahead and enable it. And I need to switch to a 2 view where I see my UV layout or just to the UV layout. So if you hit F1, this will give you the side-by-side view. F2 will give you one full view of 3D and your object. And F3 will give you just a UV layout. So in here, with it selected and my mask also selected, I'm going to left click, hold, and drag and select which UVs that I want to mask out and have that material appear. And in this case, it's the strips at the top. And then I can do the same thing for these pieces right here. Just left click, hold, and drag. Now I'm going to undo that. And if you want to, if some of your pieces of geometry are separate, you can actually use this third option here, mesh fill. Let me show you how that works. I'm going to switch back to F2 and I'm going to enable mesh fill. And all you do is these bolts are separate pieces of geometry. So make sure that mask is selected. I'm going to left click on it and this will mask out those areas that are separate pieces of geometry. They will combine in the end. So Painter knows that this is a separate mesh and it'll mask it out based on your selection. Alright, so we now have masked that part out. And also for our third material, I don't want to keep the same thing for the same type of wood for the cork area. I'm going to apply a different one. So I'm going to go to regular materials, not smart materials. And I'm going to search for wood. And the one I'm going to apply is the wood rough. This one right here. This will be enough. It's a small area. I don't need a lot of control and adjustment to it. So I'm just going to take this and drag it. This will be applied to the entire mesh again. So I'll repeat the process by clicking over. I need to create a mask first. Come over to the wood rough, right click, add black mask, select the mask, go to polygon fill. Make sure it is, in this case, I'm going to do it to an object, polygon fill, because it's a separate piece of geometry. And then just simply left click on it. Here's our very basic standard wooden barrel, just as it is without any adjustments. So we've separated all of our materials and assigned it to the specific parts of the mesh we wanted to. And the next step is to actually go through each of these layers, each of these smart materials, and adjust the properties that are given to you. Let's begin with the wood. I'm going to open that up. We have quite a few layers to go through, not a lot. I'm going to start with the base wood and take a look at it, see what's available. Every single layer will have different properties for you to adjust and change. So for base wood, we have two properties to adjust. I'm going to change the color of this. I want darker wood, more grungy, kind of dirty, not this bright. So I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to change the color. I'm going to make it darker. And I'm going to make it a little bit more saturated, something like this. And I'm also want to change my color of the HDR map that's being used to light this environment to possibly something else. I'm gonna go to the right hand side right here at the very top. We have display settings, and currently it's using environment map panorama, and I want more of a studio lighting because I want white light, neutral light. I don't want any color to be added. That way I can change my colors more accurately. So I'm gonna use this studio white soft. If you hold down shift and right click and hold and drag your mouse, this will change your light. So change light position very quick. Now let me come back down to the base wood and come back down to color. And the rest of this process, especially when we just adjust the actual smart materials, is just going through every layer up and down the stack and adjusting what we are given. So we don't use the default settings, but we tweak them to what you want in your final result. And again, this is all non-destructive. So you'll always be able to come back through and change it after. So I want this wood to be a little bit darker and a little bit more desaturated, something like this. Let's close that. Let me take a look at what AMG Dirt does. If you don't know what the layer is doing to your outcome, to your material, just disable and re-enable the visibility of it. So that gives me a little bit of dirt on my base wood. I'm going to leave that for now. Let's go through the layer stack going up with fibers. I don't really need to adjust that, I don't think. That looks good enough. Let me maybe change the color. Let's make it a little bit more saturated, maybe a little bit darker. Let's push it further. If you're not sure what it's doing, just basically either use the visibility, and then when you're adjusting and you're not sure if it's making it worse or better, just push it into extreme category, like too much color, and then push it back. So that way you know exactly what it did, and then you bring it back up into a regular normal value range. Let's go to wood veins. So actually that should be good enough. Maybe a little bit darker and less contrasty, more desaturated. Let's go back to dirt, or go up to dirt, and let's see what that does. So that adds a bit of dirt across, so I can adjust the color. I can go brighter, I could go darker. Dirt is usually dark. Let's go a little darker. And then you also have to note not just what values you can change and tweak, but also take a look at the blend settings for each layer. Most of these are set to normal, but also you have opacity. So a lot of the opacity has been changed. So here we have the dirt. So here's before, after, that's what dirt is doing. All right, let me come back down and maybe adjust base wood color and maybe make it a little bit not so dark, like so. So that way we get some contrast between the cracks, the base color, and the dirt. Because if the wood is darker, then you don't really get to see all that detail. All right, for now, I'm gonna leave this as is, and I'm gonna probably come back through. Again, this is never final until we export textures. Let's go to the steel rust surface. Let's open that up. And to make it easier to see, because once you open up those folders and you're looking inside, it becomes very difficult to kind of know which layer you're working on under which material. So what you can do is assign a color to each of the smart material and the layer stack. You can right click on the layer and just give a color. So that way when you open it up, that way it's a little easier on the eyes and easier to just find what you're doing with one layer. And I'm just going to go ahead and assign this to all three. Just give a different color. And you just simply right click on the layer and choose. So let me go ahead and open up the steel rust surface. Let's go back down the stack, choose base material. I think base material I want a little bit darker. So I'm going to scroll down to the properties, left click on the base color, and let's give this a little bit darker value. Not too much. And I also want to adjust the roughness. I think it's a little too shiny, so maybe I just want to tweak it a little bit. So usually for most of these layers, they have multiple channel controls. So you can adjust base color, height, roughness, metallic properties. Sometimes it's just color, sometimes it's just roughness, depends. So for this base metal, I have access to the height, to the roughness, metallic, and so on. So for this base metal surface, I'm going to scroll down and find roughness, and 0.65. I'm going to go maybe 0.7. Let's do 0.8. This will dull it down. So actually 0.7. There are other layers that are affecting this as well. So again, it's not just one layer. I'll have to go down the up and down the stack and find and tweak some other values as well. So this is one part of using smart materials, because we didn't build this ourselves. We're going to have to hunt down and test things out, see what they're doing and how each layer is affecting each other. Let's go to metal scratches, see what that does. All right, so a lot of the metal scratches has a lot of that reflectivity, that roughness parameter, that shininess. So let's go through and see what we can do to metal scratches. So the base color, I'm okay with that. I do, however, want to adjust the roughness. So it's 0.19. Let's go 0.3. Dull it down a little bit, maybe even higher, 0.4. So 0 towards the black will be very shiny, and 1 towards the white will be very dull. And let's take a look at the base color. I don't know if I want to change this, but I just want to maybe change it. Yeah, let's make it a little bit darker. So I'm going to undo and then go back up. So this is where it was, so I'm just going to drag it down a little bit, like so. And let me take a look. A lot of times you also have to select the mask, and the mask is going to expose either a filter, maybe a generator, maybe a smart mask. So you have further adjustments to make, not just the actual layer and the color and the information that is given to you, but also information within the mask. So here underneath this metal scratches, I have grunge scratches, dusty. If I left click on it, it gives me access to even more controls. So here you just simply, first you can just disable visibility, see what that's doing. And then you would go through and just adjust it. And you have quite a few parameters here, usually balance, contrast, a few other scratch intensities, depending on whichever properties that specific mask has, that generator, filter, or smart mask. So I'll leave it as is. Let's go to edges, see what the edge is doing. When I disable, it's a very subtle effect. So I'm not going to touch that. Rust. Rust is pretty significant. It's that color right there. So let me see if I can maybe make it darker. I'm going to select just the color, the fill layer, not the mask, and see if I can adjust the color. And in this case, it does not look like I have a color parameter. Actually, I do, but it is using a texture, so I'm not going to touch that. However, I can adjust the balance. So I'm able to maybe tone it down a little bit. So let's tone it down. And let's take a look at the contrast. So contrast, I'll leave it low, and everything else I'll keep it the same. Let's drag a light, shift, right click, hold and drag. Take a look at what it's doing. And then come back up to sharpen. I'm not going to touch sharpen, just sharpens everything, so that's fine. Alright, so we made quite a few adjustments already. Let's come back up to the wood rough, which is the cork. Actually, I'm going to double click on this layer and rename it wood rough, and I'm going to give a subname of cork so I know exactly what it's doing. Because this is a simple material, it doesn't have any properties other than the color and the mask. So I'm going to select it, come down here, and let's tone this down in saturation and color. So I'm going to make sure it's selected, come down to the properties, let's choose a different color and more desaturated, like so. So it kind of matches to overall wooden barrel that we have. Now, I don't want to make it the same. But I still want to make it kind of, so it pops a little bit, maybe a little bit brighter. And a little bit more saturation. Let's put some color back in there. Let's zoom out, take a look. All right. I think that's good. That's good for now. And one more thing you can do is you can redrag the wood material on top of the layer stack and then just disable its visibility. And that way you can see the before and after. I mean, you can already see that we drastically changed the color and made some adjustments. So it's not going to be the same or even close to what we had. But in terms of detail on the noise and dirt, you can kind of compare and see before and after. So the more you stay away from the smart material use and its defaults, the better. So I can just go ahead and quickly apply that wood back up to the layer stack at the very top, which was this wood beech veined. I'm going to drag it to the very top. So here's what we had before. This is the default. And here's our adjustments. So I'm going to keep that disabled. And just something, maybe if you went too far, you can still have it and maybe compare and then maybe tweak it down and kind of go back to a little bit closer to the default material properties. So if you went too far, that will allow you to kind of check back, but I'll keep it right there. All right, so far we've changed quite a lot. I like the look of this, a little bit more grungy, a little bit darker. And the next few steps we need to do is, one, we need to add a bit of detail for the wooden boards. Right now, this is a solid wood piece all around. However, a wooden barrel is actually built with individual wooden planks. And we currently don't have that, and we did not model that in. So how do we introduce that? Well, we can do this through a fake normal map, height map, and a color, and by actually drawing that in. It won't look as good as if it's modeled, but it's a nice quick way to fake that detail without having to model that in. And then also we're going to do another pass and add our own grunge, some rust, and break up the repetition of this, and then add some dirt. So it's a little bit more unique to your situation. Here's how we can add those planks. I'm going to go create inside the layer stack a new empty layer. Click on add layer. And I'm going to place this, actually I'm going to delete it. And I'm going to, because I need it below the steel rust surface. But above the wood. And actually we can create it inside this wood beech veined folder, but I don't want to create any custom layers inside there because I want to make sure that whatever smart material is doing, I just want to keep my own layers above it. But it doesn't matter where it's placed. You can do it above, you can do it within it. I'm going to create an empty layer. Let's rename it to planks. You can group it if you want for more organization. I'll just keep it right here and then we'll see if we need to organize them more. And then inside the properties, I'm going to scroll down all the way down to the bottom and I'm going to enable which channels do I want to paint with. So I want color and I want height and I also want roughness. I don't need metal and I don't need normal. So all I have access to now is the roughness, height, and base color. Let's come over here. I'm going to start painting. See what it does. Okay, so it's going to paint it inside that layer with the color and the height and the roughness you specify. I'm going to undo. I'm going to change the base color to something a little bit darker, but more on the brown, dark brown. I'm going to use the color picker. Lock, hold, and drag on top of your mesh. Just sample something from here. And then maybe get a little bit darker. So these are the indents. So I want them to be dark to give the illusion that they're actually an indent between the boards. However, right now it's very shiny. So the color is good, but it's too shiny. So I'm gonna, the roughness, pull it up all the way to 1. I don't want it to be shiny. And then also my height. I want this to be pushed in to create the illusion of the indent. So the height, if you tone it down into the negative value, paint, it's gonna start creating that indent. I'm gonna go ahead and go higher. Let's go in negative 0.4. Let's see what that does. All right, so that's not bad. So if I lower my brush right now with the bracket keys, and the default brushes right now that it's painted with is a soft round brush. So this is just a test. I will change this brush to something else. But let me paint, and you can see that it's creating that dent. Let's go into the height and maybe let's do 0.5. Let's see what it does. All right, that's gonna look good. So you could use this rounded brush, the default. However, there's not going to be any breakup in between wooden boards, and we could come back in later and paint out or erase with a different brush and create a bit of a kind of rough edge. It just will take a little bit of time. Or we could use another brush to paint with and see if we could get a better effect right away. I'm going to scroll back up and I'm going to find the alpha. And I'm going to look for a different brush. So you can do it through here, or you can go into the shelf, find brushes, and find a different brush to use. I'm going to search for, in the libraries, in the shelf, with the brush selected, I'm going to search for dirt. And I'm going to choose and paint with dirt 1. Let me make it smaller using the bracket keys. I'm going to adjust a few settings first. So if I paint, it gives me a little bit of the breakup around the edges. Let me see, spacing. I think spacing is good. Actually, let's lower it down. Let's see what that does. Less spacing gives me more consistent brush. You can paint right here in the properties paint and see what the outcome will be. Let me lower my brush even more and let me do a test. If you left click once, somewhere it will start your stroke and you press shift and then move your mouse down, it will give you a straight line. So that way we can create straight lines as we paint. So that's not bad. Let me see if I can adjust a few more properties here. And you can see right here on the properties paint tab in the panel, our alpha changed to whatever we had selected right here. Yeah, let me lower my brush. Let me maybe change my spacing. Let's do 1 and test it out. So you just have to find the right brush setting first. Actually, that's pretty good. I'm going to go a little bit higher. Before you can paint, you gotta just set up your settings first. So I don't have pen pressure. I'm doing this with a mouse. All right, I think that's going to be pretty good. So everything we paint is going to be on the planks layer. So we've set everything up, and let's go ahead and start painting. So I'm going to do this manually by just simply drawing all the boards all the way across. And then we're going to attack the top and the bottom. So this process could be a little bit time consuming because we are doing it by hand. We might have to make adjustments, undo. So I'm going to left click first, hold down shift, and I can go all the way down with a straight line, but I've found that actually if I can just do this in sections, I can create more realistic wooden plank look. So I'm going to left click and just kind of follow the curvature a little bit, changing the direction slightly so it's angled down as I go up, kind of thinking that, you know, the barrel is rounded. So I'm gonna try to introduce that a little bit into, let me undo this and go right here, left click and go there. Too far, because I wanted to make it look like that it's a continuous wooden plank. And I'm just gonna find the width that I want, rotate and do the plank right here, like so. Take a look from far away, see how that looks. Come back in, let's zoom in and take a look what it's doing. All right, that's pretty good. And continue. I'm gonna speed this section up, and I'm simply going to just continue doing this around the barrel, so you don't have to watch me do this in real time, because this is a repetitive, continuous process. Now the key to this process is just to vary the different lengths or widths of the boards, so it just looks more natural because they're not going to be all the same. But also, you know, having enough distance so you can complete, so it looks, you know, so no board is looking too small or too wide. And you can also go back through and fix anything you need because we have our own layer. So if you switch over to the eraser, the shortcut key is 2. You can erase what you painted and just draw a new line. Then go back to 1, the brush, use the same settings, and just redraw it for a little bit more accurate line. So you can go back and you still, you know, this is still adjustable process. And actually I don't really like that particular one, so let me redo it really quick. In this case, let me see if I can just draw a straight line. And you can still go back into the planks and then maybe tone down the opacity of it. So quite a few adjustments you can still make, as well as kind of going back in and repainting. Now, the other parts of the boards are at the top, and this is a bit, again, also somewhat time consuming, because naturally you would have the board continue the same way. You know, this line would continue up to be right there, and then it would also end up being right here. And then around here you actually have individual planks going across, like so. So I just need to go through and paint that information in by actually doing this manually. And I have to paint this at the top, and I have to paint it on the bottom. I could go into the UV view and do it here, and that's also an option. However, my UVs are not really laid out in a way that I can just paint. I mean, I could, actually that's the bottom portion. Let me undo. Let me go back into F1, which is the two view. So if you draw it across like so, you know, I don't have that shell separated. So if I would have to be very careful how I paint, because otherwise it will slice across, but then it won't connect up here very accurately. This one's very close. That was just luck. But if I continue doing this, you'll see that it's actually not going to connect across like I want. So I do need to do this in 3D view so I can be more precise. And again, this is just going to take a little bit of time. So let me go ahead and speed this video up as well. But it will be, I want to leave it up visible so you can see. But I'll speed up this process as well as the one on the bottom. And the one on the bottom, I'll cut that out, but I'll show you because it'll be the same exact process as I do at the top. Alright, so here's what we have so far. I painted the indents at the top and the bottom, and I was trying to be very precise to kind of, so it makes it look like this board continues and it's the same one, it goes around, and then there's another piece of board which is usually at the top that gets hammered in, so that's a separate piece. So and you saw me switch over to F3 for the UV layout, so I was drawing the lines when I was doing the top ones across. And I mean, the more time you take, the more precise you can be. And I also did the same ones on the bottom. All time consuming, but in the end it does look pretty good. And now I have the illusion of the wooden boards without having to model that in. And I still have a lot of adjustments that I could still make to this. So if they're too intense, I'll just drop down the opacity to it, to the layer. Tone it down a little bit. Maybe let's go down to maybe 85, 86 or so. And now we have plank detail. Now let's focus on the last part of this tutorial, which is going to be adding our own custom variation to this smart material. And this is going to be in the form of additional dirt, maybe some rust, on top of what we already have. So the first one is going to be focused on the wood, and we're just going to add some additional dripping rust. Like it's, you know, coming from the metal rusted pieces, and just some, it will also add some variation to the texture, to the color. So for this, I'm going to make sure that I am below the rust surface steel layer, the group, and I can be on top of the planks. So I'm going to create a new fill layer. So not an empty layer like for the planks, but an actual fill layer. This will give us ability to choose a certain color to fill everything with. So I'm gonna disable everything except for roughness and color. And for my roughness, I want it to be very rough, because I mean, this is going to be rust or dirt. Usually it's not very shiny, so I'm gonna drop it down to 0.9. And then for the color, since it's going to be kind of a dirt slash rust type of stains, I'm gonna go dark, and then let's go to a little bit more brown, like so, more towards very dark brown, like so. Alright, so that's going to be our color. Now we need to add the black mask to mask everything. So within that layer, fill layer, let me rename it. I'm going to keep fill layer, but I'll add a postfix of wood, dirt, rust. And I'm going to right click and let's add black mask. Alright, so now we masked everything out. The information is still there, it's invisible. And then we're going to add a generator. Generator allows you to use some procedural elements to kind of blend your mask with the generator. There's a set of generators you can use right away with Painter. So I'm going to right click on the mask and choose Add Generator. It's going to give you an additional like sublayer. And then in the properties, choose the generator you want to use. So let's left click on this and you can search for one, but there's not that many to choose from. So you can actually just scroll. And there's one that says dirt, which might be pretty good. And there's another one called drip and rust. So I'll actually choose this one, but you can have more to kind of test things out and then choose the best one to keep. So I'll use this one. It already looks pretty good. Let's go into properties and take a look at what we can adjust. We can adjust rust spreading. And if you don't get this menu, you just have to make sure you select the drip and rust generator for this menu to appear. Let's do rust contrast. So this is just a matter of tweaking the sliders until you choose something that looks good for your mesh. Now the intensity is a little bit too strong, and depending on the generator you use, maybe even come back through the layer stack and maybe adjust the wood color on the original smart material. So let's go a little bit more heavy, because that also helps to break up the texture itself. All right, so I think the intensity is a little bit too much, but it's a good start. Let me adjust the color. I'm gonna go back into my fill layer wood, dirt, rust, and maybe change the color a little bit brighter. Like so. Now it blends in a little bit better. Let me adjust my planks, maybe drop them down a little bit. And then let me maybe come back into the layer for the color for original smart material. So it's like now I can go back through and start adjusting some properties. Let's maybe drop this down a little bit darker. Maybe bring back a little bit of saturation into it, maybe not. Now it's appearing a little too dark. Let me go back up. And now I'm going to go back to my generator. If you don't see it, you have to select the layer and then go drip and rust and maybe adjust the intensity of it. Change the light, take a look at it. And basically just go back and forth and continue to adjust. Let me show you another one, like a way you can check which generator you might want to use. So I'm going to go ahead and disable this one. And this is also how you can check what you're doing. But let me add another one. I'm going to add another generator on top with that other one disabled. Add generator. So now I have two. And then I'm going to choose the one I want to use. And in this case, I'm going to choose dirt. So I just want to see what that generator does and which one is going to be better. So this one just kind of gives you overall dirt. It gives you a nice dirt around some of the occlusion areas. So I can increase the dirt level, maybe increase the contrast, maybe drop this back down. Grunge amount, scale. So then you can maybe disable this, introduce the other one, see whichever one you like better. So I like the drip and rust more, so I'll delete that one. But this is how you can just add more and see whichever one you want to keep. I like doing this. Just kind of before and after and then pick the best option. Let's do something similar but to the steel rust. And for this I'm going to use a different technique. Instead of using a generator, I'm going to use a smart mask. So for this to work, I need to be within the layer for steel rust because I want to utilize the mask that is being used. So I'm going to just go above sharpen and create a new fill layer. So that way it applies only to the rings and not to the wood or anything else. I'm going to rename this and I'll rename this fill layer custom rust or something similar. And then I'm going to add a black mask. So it masks everything out and I get to see my material back. Then I'm going to select the mask and then I'm going to switch over to smart masks, which is going to be this third icon on the shelf on the left. And there's quite a lot of masks that you can take a look at what they do. Basically what you would do is you take one, left click, hold and drag and just drop it into the fill layer, into the mask itself of the newly created fill layer. And it will apply something to it for you to adjust. You can enable, disable, see what it does. Each smart mask will do something very different depending on what that mask is. And then you'll have additional controls for you to tweak. Now I'm not going to do this one. I am going to choose edge rust. So actually, if you search for rust, quite a few of them come up, and you can take a look and just try out whichever one looks the best. Let me try this one, for example, rust. Just adds a bunch of stuff in here. I'm gonna go ahead and disable this, remove it. Now, before I actually do something with the mask, let me go back to the fill layer, because I forgot to do one very important thing, and that's disable any channel that I do not need. In this case, I don't need normal, I don't need metal. I may change roughness. I don't need height, so it's gonna be just color and roughness. So all the other channels I do not need. Let me go back to the mask, and then let's find something. So I'm gonna use this edge rust. I'm gonna drag it right into the mask and see what it does. I'm gonna go change the color first, so it's not that white. I'm gonna go back to the fill layer, properties, left click and choose a color. So again, it's gonna be kind of that brownish color, like so, just not that intense, but that kind of dark saturated brown. It's also very shiny, so I'm gonna turn down my roughness, so that way you can see what it's doing. I'm gonna come down to roughness value and I'm gonna turn that up. Let's do 0.9 so it's not so shiny. Actually, we can go all the way up to 1, because rust is usually not very shiny at all. But maybe just a little bit, very tiny amount. And maybe let me come back and adjust the color still. Alright, now I'm gonna jump back into the mask, and then I have 3 different ways I can adjust what it's gonna look like. So you just have to go through each one and see what they do. I'm gonna go to the bottom one and see what global blur does. So it just blurs everything. Color global balance just increases the edge, looks like it. Then I have curvature, ambient occlusion controls. Actually, I'm just gonna focus on a few properties. Let me jump back to another one, mask editor for this one, and let's see what that does. Global blur, global balance, kind of increases the intensity of it a little bit more. Global contrast. Let's go back to the grunge roughness. Let's see balance. All right, now we can adjust the intensity overall. And then again, I can just enable, disable, see if it's improving or not. And I think my color is way too intense. So I'm gonna go back to the layer and maybe let's go a little bit more saturated and not as intense in color, like so. I like that a little bit of that introduces on those kind of bolts, the things that the straps that holds the rings together. Now let's go back into the mask and continue to adjust. Now maybe contrast, maybe contrast, but I think it introduces too much noise, so I'm gonna turn that down. Let's zoom out. You always want to take a look at your entire mesh zoomed out. Don't work too close all the time. And then, is it improving? Is it better? Is it worse? I'm gonna go ahead and just disable on and off. I think it's definitely an improvement. And you also have additional controls for here for grunge, roughness, mask editor, the opacities. You can adjust the opacity for each. So if one is creating too much of change, you can tone down the opacity a little bit. So you just go back and through, and if it's, again, if it doesn't blend with your background material but you like the effect, then you may even jump into the layer stack for your smart material and adjust a few properties here. Maybe adjust the rust that's already on there, blend it a little bit better. So let's select this. I have balance, so maybe tone it down. Maybe change my metal base, the color, maybe tone that down, make it a little bit darker. I do want to have a little bit lighter, so like when I have a nice separation of wood and the steel. And then I think that might be a little bit too dark. Then again, constant adjustments can like point you to the right values. Then you need to come back and adjust your original custom rust. So in this case, maybe I'll just change the color a little bit, like so. And basically just go back and forth and find what you like. So the generators and the smart mask adjustments on top of your smart materials is a great way to break things up and add your own variation. So you're not using the default properties, even though, you know, when you first start Painter, it does look cool when you first apply your smart materials and you think, well, I'm done. But you gotta do more with them. You gotta adjust what you're given and then maybe add more custom stuff on top. Another important thing is I didn't want to introduce a lot of unique detail into this barrel, because the idea behind this barrel is it would be duplicated and used across the entire level, for example. And if I am to introduce something very specific to this, like some kind of a decal or unique scratch or like a big damage area or some kind of a dirt element, like for example dirt coming up from the bottom, this barrel would be duplicated over and over and over again for like maybe a dozen or hundreds of times within maybe the same area, and you'd be able to pick up on that unique detail. So I wanted to keep this very somewhat generic and not repeatable, so you can reuse this barrel over and over again without a player picking up on repetition and duplication of this asset. So after you've gone through and you changed everything how you wanted, you added your own custom element to it, and you like how this looks, and you're ready for these textures to be exported and used to import into UV4 or UV5, let's go ahead and export them now. Go to File, Export Textures. Choose the location where you want to export them to. So I'll navigate into the folder where I want to place those textures. Here we are. This is where I want to place them inside my project directory for this specific project I'm working on. I'm going to select folder. It's going to point right into that folder. That's where they are going to be placed. My output template is going to be Unreal Engine 4 packed. That means it's going to take the metallic, the ambient occlusion, and the roughness textures. I'm going to pack them into one instead of 3 separate textures. So this is great. File type is, I'm going to set this to PNG. Size based on each texture set size, which is going to be 2K texture, 2048 by 2048. All right, everything gets kept the same. I'm going to switch over to Lambert 1. This right here, Lambert 1, is my shader that I was using in Maya. That's what it got exported as, and that's the name that was used. I'm not worried about changing this, but if you wanted to have this a different name, right here in the top right under texture set list, you just rename this, and that name would appear here as well. And that name actually gets added to your texture name as after the export. I'm gonna save everything as is. Everything's checked. So it's gonna give you color, metallic, or metallic, which is packed. This is metallic roughness and ambient occlusion. Normal map, and there's an emissive texture as well. We don't have any emissive properties, so I could disable this. I'll keep it, but then I'll delete it. And then hit export. And that is it. We are done. Let's take a look. So here we have our base color. It's looking good. We have our normal map. We'll throw that detail. And we have our packed texture. Now this packed texture, again, like I said, it has ambient occlusion, metallic, and roughness packed into each channel, RG and B. So I'm going to open this in Photoshop and just show you what it means. So I'm going to go to channels and take a look at the red channel. So red channel is your ambient occlusion, green channel is your roughness, and blue channel is your metallic. And the easy way that I like to remember is an acronym ARM. A-R-M, A, ambient occlusion, R, roughness, M, metallic, RGB, ARM. And that is it for texturing your wooden barrel. Next, we're going to import this wooden barrel mesh into UV4 along with the textures, then create a material, set up everything correctly, apply that material onto the mesh, and have a usable asset inside UV4.